Love. People talk about it like it's magic, like it's some mysterious cosmic force that strikes two souls at the perfect moment. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Love is not magic. Love is psychology. And when it comes to how women fall in love, the process is far darker, far deeper, and far more calculated than most men realize. Because attraction isn't just about looks, it's about power. It's about emotional influence. It's about triggering ancient psychological mechanisms buried deep inside the human brain. The truth is, most men think women fall in love because of kindness, or loyalty, or effort. But psychology reveals something far more ruthless. Women rarely fall in love with the man who tries the hardest. They fall in love with the man who activates the strongest emotions inside their mind. And emotions are the easiest thing in the world to manipulate. Tonight, we're going deep into the psychological mechanisms that control female attraction. The subconscious triggers, the emotional hooks, the silent power dynamics, and the uncomfortable truth about why some men effortlessly pull women in while others get ignored no matter how hard they try. This is not romance. This is psychology. Welcome to ThinkDeepMind. Women fall in love with feelings. This is the first rule most men fail to understand. A woman doesn't fall in love with your job, your car, your muscles, your height. Those things might attract her attention, but attention is not love. Love happens inside the brain, and the brain works through emotional stimulation. Psychologically speaking, the female mind is highly responsive to emotional contrast, meaning the more emotional highs and lows a man creates, the deeper her brain becomes addicted to him. This is why the perfect, nice guy often loses, because perfection is predictable, and predictable emotions create boredom. But the man who is slightly mysterious, slightly unpredictable, slightly dangerous creates emotional spikes, and emotional spikes create dopamine release inside the brain. Dopamine is the chemical responsible for addiction, the same chemical involved in gambling, drugs, and social media. When a man triggers dopamine spikes in a woman's mind, her brain begins associating him with emotional reward. And slowly, without realizing it, her mind starts craving him, not because she logically decided to, but because her brain chemistry wired itself to him. Predictable men are safe, but mystery creates obsession. Human psychology is deeply vulnerable to information gaps. When the brain cannot fully understand something, it becomes obsessed with figuring it out. This is called the curiosity loop. Women are extremely sensitive to this psychological trigger. When a man reveals everything about himself instantly, his mystery disappears. But when a man reveals himself slowly, strategically, piece by piece, her brain begins filling in the gaps. And the more her mind thinks about him, the more emotional investment she develops. This is why mystery is so powerful. Not because it hides who you are, but because it forces her brain to chase answers. And the moment her mind starts chasing, the emotional power dynamic shifts. Now she's not just interested, she's invested. Most men try to impress women with consistency, but psychology shows something different. Consistency is comfortable, but contrast is unforgettable. The human brain remembers emotional contrast far more strongly than emotional stability. Meaning, if a man is always nice, available, agreeable, his emotional presence becomes background noise. But when a man can shift between warmth and distance, charm and indifference, attention and mystery, he creates emotional turbulence inside her mind. And turbulence creates emotional intensity. Intensity leads to attachment. This is why some relationships feel addictive. Not because they are healthy, but because they constantly stimulate emotional highs and lows. The brain becomes trapped in a cycle of emotional reward and emotional uncertainty. And once that cycle begins, breaking it becomes extremely difficult. Female attraction is deeply connected to perceived status. This doesn't necessarily mean money. Status is psychological.
It means how valuable a man appears in the social hierarchy. Humans evolved in tribal systems where survival depended on powerful leaders. Because of this evolutionary wiring, women subconsciously feel drawn to men who appear respected, confident, and socially dominant. But here's the darker psychological truth. Status is not always real. It's often perceived. A man who behaves like he has options appears valuable. A man who behaves like he needs approval appears lower status. This is why confidence is magnetic, not because it guarantees success, but because it signals power, and the female brain is wired to notice power. One of the most powerful psychological phenomena in attraction is emotional imprinting. This happens when a woman experiences a strong emotional moment connected to a specific person. For example, deep laughter, a thrilling adventure, an intense emotional conversation. Moments like these create strong neural associations. The brain remembers who was present during emotional intensity. If a man becomes part of these moments, her brain begins linking him to those emotional memories. Over time, those memories form emotional bonds, and bonds slowly evolve into attachment. Love often begins not with logic, but with repeated emotional imprinting. Psychology reveals something many people refuse to admit. Danger creates attraction. Not physical danger, but emotional unpredictability. The human brain evolved to pay extreme attention to things that feel intense or risky. When a man appears too safe, too agreeable, too easy to control, the brain categorizes him as low stimulation. But a man who appears slightly rebellious, confident in his independence, unafraid of confrontation, triggers a different response. His presence feels electrifying, not necessarily because he is good, but because he is stimulating. And stimulation keeps the brain engaged. Attention is currency, and scarcity increases value. When attention is given too freely, it becomes worthless. But when attention is selective, it becomes powerful. A woman who feels like she has earned a man's attention values it far more than attention given automatically. This psychological dynamic is similar to reward systems in behavioral conditioning. The brain values rewards more when they are intermittent rather than constant. This is why unpredictable attention can become addictive. The brain keeps chasing the next emotional reward. Here's the reality few people admit. Women rarely fall in love with logic. They fall in love with emotional experience. The man who creates the deepest emotional journey wins the strongest attachment. Not necessarily the kindest, not necessarily the most loyal, but the man whose presence feels intense, stimulating, and unforgettable. Because the brain remembers emotion far more than reason. Love, in many cases, is simply the brain becoming addicted to a person who repeatedly triggers powerful emotional states. And once that addiction forms, walking away becomes incredibly difficult. Love isn't always what it seems. Behind every emotional connection, there are psychological mechanisms silently shaping our feelings. And the more you understand the psychology of attraction, the more clearly you start seeing the patterns hidden beneath human behavior. The question is, do you want love to stay a mystery, or do you want to understand how the mind really works? Because once you see the psychology behind attraction, you can never unsee it. This is ThinkDeepMind, where we explore the darkest truths about the human mind.